received a couple of grants from Humanities Center, and I served as a board member twice.
Sorry, I meant to say that.
I really appreciate the role of the Humanities Center on campus. So I came up with this title a while ago, and this is kind of an idea that's been on my mind for about 4 years. This will be the first time I've attempted to speak publicly about this idea. And so this weekend I was in a little bit of a panic, realizing that I had to figure something out. So hopefully it'll be okay. It'll make sense to you. I put together a little outline of what I'd like to talk about today. So I'm going to start with just a few thoughts, a general introduction, and I wanted that to be coherent, so I wrote that out. So I'll read it. It's pretty short. As I talk through that, I'm going to show you images of 3 recent sculptures. Move into an images of a recent exhibition, and part of that idea is seeing the work as a group and how the different individual sculptures inform one another. A quote that I like from Michael Heiser, contemporary American artist, hopefully it'll be meaningful to you as well. The next section, I'd like to go through some images of my studios. For me as an artist, it's always really interesting to see how other artists work, and in some ways that's maybe more interesting than the work itself at times. So I have a few images to show you. You might get a sense of how I approach being an artist. Images of images of 2 works in progress, so I can talk a little bit about my process. And then finishing up with some images of recent sculptures. So at any time as I go through this, if anyone has any questions, just ask. Okay, so this is the part I'm going to read. When contemplating what I could say today, I chose alchemistry as a metaphor for the creative process and as an analogy for the practice of creating sculpture. Alchemistry can be understood as the search for a means to turn non-precious or semi-precious metal, like copper or lead, into a precious metal, such as gold. The base materials are consumed and transformed through an arduous, multi-stage process of distillation and recombination. The final outcome, the philosopher's stone, signals not only the production of gold, but also the development of wisdom in the maker. The pre-enlightenment exercise is materially focused with metaphysical overtones, connecting rationality and empirical knowledge. The root of sculpture is not dissimilar from alchemy. Sculpture is an extension of the mind created through the body. Sculpture represents and personifies human experience, while simultaneously existing within our space, often with a human appearance. Sculpture continues to exist concurrently in fictive and actual realms. Even after the advent of the expressive qualities in art associated with Romanticism in the late 18th century and the subsequent development of sculpture in the late 19th and early 20th centuries to include an exploration of its own conditions as its syntax, sculpture still involves the real and imagined. I suggest that a sculpture, whether figural or not, exists first as a dependent and then increasingly becomes sovereign, to the point of potentially establishing its own sentience. The myth of Pygmalion carving an ivory sculpture of Galatea, the myth of Pygmalion carving an ivory sculpture of Galatea, falling in love with the sculpture, and then after she was brought to life by Cupid through the actions of the goddess Venus, marrying her, represents a common vision. The notion that the imaginary component of a sculpture is so close to reality that the sculpture transforms and becomes animated is integral to creating, contemplating, and understanding sculpture. Any sculpture, even those not figural. Like the philosopher's stone, the creation of a sculpture involves processing common materials in a way in which the resulting sequence of material and form in space and time has the potential to exceed the boundaries imposed by its constituent parts and by the limits of its making. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Jan, would you be opposed to giving us a copy of that?
Sure. So my path into sculpture was maybe a little bit different than many folks or than some folks. And you might get a sense of this from the thoughts I just read to you. I came to sculpture through philosophy, which isn't to say I consider myself a philosopher in the academic sense. I don't. But really, notions of the real, notions of what can be real, and ideas about the perception of reality. That's what brought me to sculpture. So a few images from a show almost 4 years ago. So because sculpture generally doesn't have a utilitarian purpose, it's kind of a free agent or a free radical. It has an assigned or an understood value, not just financially, but materially and conceptually. And so, in my mind, it's an open-ended proposition and a place for experimentation with reality itself. So this space, I broke out the laser pointer for this talk. This space, this was a small gallery, but I was really happy with the way the work sat in it. The space is kind of a horseshoe shape, so we're looking down one leg from the entrance. And so when I create sculpture, I do think of each sculpture as a discrete unit. But when I install a show, I'm very much interested in the interplay between works and how they inform or change one another through proximity. So this is kind of going around the gallery. The idea of how the viewer or myself travels through the gallery space and the work is revealed and concealed as one walks, that's a big part of what I'm interested in. So this is kind of then turning around, looking back. So one idea that I've been working with for the last 4 years, this sculpture is the first one from 2007. I started to really think about the alchemistry as a metaphor, as an analogy, but I also borrow some I guess, visual material from the little bit of alchemistry that was preserved, some of the imagery, that's the word I want. And so this kind of support that's a table, a gallery pedestal, a workbench. I'm interested in that having multiple meanings simultaneously, and both existing in a kind of a contemporary space, but also an archaic space simultaneously. And so a lot of these compositions of the supports are influenced by historical matter. And in this talk, I should say, I'm not really showing you source imagery. This is more just about kind of what my current sculpture looks like. And I'm limiting the talk